Hi everyone, welcome to the third episode of Ghost and Toast Makeup Sundays. Nice to see you. How are you guys? Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, every Sunday we just sit down and talk about a haunted location and ghost stories, drink, and I do my makeup and get ready for the day. So thank you for joining me, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join me every Sunday because I'm here for you. So let's go ahead and get started. Today we're going to talk about the Vail Mansion in Independence, Missouri. And this mansion has been around for a very long time and it has a lot of history. It has seen several things during its time standing. So we're just going to talk about that first before we get into the ghost stories. All right. The Vail Mansion was built by Colonel Henry Vail and his wife Sophia in 1881. They started construction in 1871. It took them 10 years to finish the property. It is a huge 3-story Gothic-like mansion that has 31 rooms. It had running water, which back in 1881 is crazy. People didn't have running water back then, but this architect that they hired was able to somehow incorporate it into the house. They had a $6,000 gallon water tank on the property that connected to the house, which in turn caused them to have running water, hot and cold water, and flushing toilets. So that was pretty interesting for the time. The mansion also had a 48,000 gallon wine cellar down in the basement. And it also had 9 marble fireplaces that were hand carved, as well as painted ceilings. So this was a pretty intricate little house. I guess it wasn't little, it was pretty dang big. The house has had quite a bit of history with it, but let's start off with a little bit of history about Harvey and his wife before we get into that. So Harvey Vail was born in Vermont in 1831. He graduated with a law degree from the University of Louisville, and he arrived in Kansas City in 1859. He did a lot with his law degree, but when he moved to Kansas City, he became the postal commissioner. So he was in charge of the postal routes and the U.S. Postal Service for the area. After the house was built, it served as a meeting place and a gathering place for senators and several passing dignitaries that were very wealthy and like very up there in the community. So Vail, worked as the postal commissioner for a while, but he was accused of mail fraud. And it was so severe that he had to go to trial twice for it. And he was accused of selling off very profitable mail routes to people, like to contractors with the highest bid. And then he would split the money with like his partner, I guess. So he was stealing money from the government by selling these routes off to contractors. So he had to go to trial for it. So that means he had to go all the way to Washington to attend his trial, and he went in 1881 and 1882, which really was like terrible for his family and his reputation. The community kind of shunned him for what he did. They full-heartedly believed that that's what he did. he, committed fraud and that he needed to pay for it. So he was once welcomed into the community, and he was a super high up dignitary and leader of the community, and then all of that came crashing down with these trials. In the midst of those trials, his wife, Sophia, was diagnosed with stomach cancer, and also with the fall of their reputation and the fall of their reputation and just them as people in general, she was terrified of losing everything as well as having cancer. So she essentially was just like, okay, well, I'm gonna die anyways and I'm gonna lose everything, so what's the point of being alive? So she ended up committing suicide in 1883 on Valentine's Day nonetheless, while Harvey was gone at his trial. So she committed suicide on February 14th in 1883 by a morphine overdose. Morphine was very easy to get back in the day. That's what people used for everything. And because of her diagnosis, she had it. So she ended up killing herself with the morphine. And her husband came back to that, which is traumatic to say the least. It is said that Vale buried her in a glass-top coffin in the front yard, flush to the ground. So that means it was like the top of the coffin was equal to the ground, and that way he could go look at her whenever he wanted. It's not confirmed that that actually happened, but it's just a legend that people say. He was devastated after the loss of his wife, and just lived his days sitting in a room looking out at his property until he had a stroke 5 years later in 1895. It is said that after his death in 1895, it served as an inn for travelers, and after a while that changed into a sanitarium for the mentally ill, and that was shut down due to abuse of the patients. It was said that there wasn't a lot known about mental illness at the time, and they didn't have a lot of treatments for these illnesses, so they were severely abused. They were starved, they were electrocuted, gassed, you name it. Ice pick lobotomies were a thing back then, where the doctor would take an ice pick and shove it into the patient's cerebellum and see if it changed their behavior. And none of this was with anesthesia or anything. So severe abuse happened here, and several patients died. And after the death of so many patients, it was said that the sanitarium was then shut down due to all of these deaths. And after it was a sanitarium, it then changed into a nursing home for elderly, and that also was shut down due to abuse. People were neglecting the residents. They weren't taking care of the elderly. They were physically, verbally, and sexually abusing them. So that got shut down as well, and several people died when it was a nursing home as well. After the nursing home was shut down, it sat empty for quite a while until a couple bought it in the 60s. They only lived there a couple of years until the husband ended up passing away in the house, and the wife just auctioned it off to the city she didn't want to deal with it, and it kind of freaked her out. I guess her husband died of like unexplained circumstances. Technically it was natural causes, but she claimed that he was very healthy. So she was just like, I'm out. So she ended up selling it to the city. And after the city had it for some time, they then turned it into a museum. And that's what it is today. Before we get into some of the hauntings and some of the things people experience, I'm gonna go ahead and do my cut crease, so sit back and watch. So some of the ghostly activity that happens in the house, there's a lot of people seeing the same things, but it was said that when Mr. Vale passed away, that room that he made to look out over his property, it was said that he made that after his wife passed away, and he also hired a woodworker to put faces in the woodwork. And if you go to the mansion, you can see the faces throughout the woodwork, but most of the faces after he died people said that they turned like twisted and almost demonic looking like, and there's only 2 faces in the whole room that actually aren't like that. And people say that that's supposed to represent Harvey and his wife. I'm not sure if that legend is true, but that's just what people say. It's also said that after Sophia passed away and he built that room, that when he passed away, he was upstairs on the 2nd floor and that room was downstairs on the 1st floor. People, like the servants, said that when he passed away, the second that his like spirit left his body, the windows and the shutters downstairs in that room with all the faces in it like blew open, and nobody was down there at the time. So that kind of started off the activity, and from there on out, people say that they see Sophia walking along the premises. They say they see her in a white dress, and she sadly committed suicide on the 2nd floor, and they said that they see her outside, looking outside of the windows on the 2nd floor from the room that she passed away in. So that is a common occurrence that people see at the mansion. People also say that they have seen the ghost of Mr. Vale sitting in his rocking chair in the room that he sat in, that he, watched over the property in every day after Sophia passed away. And he also is seen upstairs in the room that he passed away in. He passed away in his rocking chair, so the rocking chair has been known to rock back and forth on its own, move on its own. Objects have been known to move without anyone moving them. Doors open and close, all mostly on the second floor, around the areas that Sophia and Henry died. So people definitely believe that they are still there, watching over their house. And I'm going to link a couple of paranormal investigations below and their findings. So take some time and look at that, because they're pretty interesting. I will also link the website to the mansion below. They're not doing tours at the moment. It's currently closed due to COVID, but they are doing special tours for investigation teams, but it's just not open to the public at this time. Okay, while I finish up, I'm going to tell you guys a story from a tour guide that works on the property. It's pretty long, so I might speed it up a little bit, but bear with me, it's pretty interesting, okay?
It was long before sunrise when the gentleman tour guide at Vale Mansion in Independence, Missouri, stepped to the front door, key in hand. It would be a long day. The special champagne reception was to take place at the mansion that afternoon, and there was much to prepare. It was at that reception, in fact, that drew him to the mansion so early on a Sunday morning. It was he who would have to let in the decorations and caterers before beginning his regular state tours. Later, the house would be bustling with activity, but now, before dawn, it was silent and abandoned, and he found that he had approached it with trepidation. It was so dark. There was little contrast between the mansion and the sky above it. There was only a pale outline of the place cast by the light of the moon. As he worked the lock, he became acutely aware of his loneliness. The quiet had weight. It was like a thing that settled on his shoulders. He could hear his own pulse. Then, when the lock gave and the door swung slowly from its casting, the house released an audible sigh that raised the hair on its arms. The old gentleman had heard stories of ghosts at Vale Mansion long before he started giving tours there. He had never lent them much credence. Haunted or not, it was a beautiful environment into which to volunteer, and in his retirement, he discovered for the first time that he was actually really good at telling stories and drawing visitors to the history of the home. But death was always part of the narrative. This was a home that knew death. Mrs. Vale, wearied and pained by cancer, took her own life with a lethal dose of opium and morphine back in 1883. Later, when the home was converted into a sanitarium, other deaths would follow. In the daylight, this grim plotline was amped up as an intriguing but benign bit of theater meant to widen the eyes of tourists. Now, as the gentleman set foot on the old wooden floor of the entryway and the deep darkness of the immense house stretched before him, he wondered what kind of imprint the passing of disquieted souls might have left there. The gentleman stood planted just inside the door. The only light came from faint reflections of the moon on the many mirrors in the parlor, to the left and right of the entryway. The parlors were rather large for the era, but then the mansion was huge. With 31 rooms on 3 floors, there were many nooks in which to become startled. He thought of spaces that were currently invisible to him. The kitchen at the back of the house and the odd little seance-shaped room beyond it. The butler's pantry tucked behind the dining room, the alcove beneath the stairs with just enough room for a chair and small table. Each room suddenly seemed like a threat. But the spaces upstairs were the ones that now troubled him. Even when the house was peopled with tourists, the mirror atop the staircase made the old gentleman apprehensive. More than once, out of the corner of his eye, he perceived strange movements in that mirror that were imperceptible when looking at it head-on. Now he found himself directly beneath it. The isolation of the scene and his station within it brought a wave of dread over him. Tense and alert, he never felt so sensitive to the air he breathed. A sharp turn from the landing atop the stairs concealed various rooms with unusual or unsavory paths. There was a bedroom in which Mrs. Vale ended her life. Near it was that crazy little smoking room with hundreds of strange faces painted to the grain of the wood paneling. And then there was the ballroom on the 3rd floor of the house, a cavernous blank canvas of space that was never finished. Construction had just begun when Mrs. Vale died, and Mr. Vale saw little point in carrying out the project when he found himself alone. It was ultimately lined with beds of patients at the sanitarium, and now it was used for storage and blocked off from tourists. Just beneath it, in the space now occupied by the gift shop, was a bright room with lots of windows that had been used for surgery and electric shock treatments. Yes, thought the old gentleman, these things have an effect on this place. They leave a residue. The gentleman shuddered, snapped into action. Light would extinguish the gloom and set his heart back to its natural beat. He would make quick work of turning on the many lamps throughout the place, those nearest to him blazing a safe path to the furthest reaches of the home. He began in the parlors. The gentleman looked and felt satisfied. He no longer sensed a menace on the 1st floor. But the floors above were still dark. They would always be dark. Even when the sun burned bright at its apex in the sky. Heavy wooden blinds filtered the light, shielding delicate antiques from damaging rays and tamping down the late summer heat. No one ever saw a ghost downstairs, at least not that he could recall. No, it was the room upstairs that set visitors' nerves to twitching. He made his way back through one of the parlors and stood at the foot of the stairs. He willed himself to look at the mirror above him on the 2nd floor landing. It was faintly visible, shrouded mostly in darkness. No movement, just glass and shadow. He swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and then jumped into a wobbly, mad sprint up the stairs. Anxiety, coupled with the desire to vanquish its source, enabled his old body to tap reserves of energy he hadn't accessed in decades. He fumbled for the light switch. Where was it? Panicking, he swatted at the Victorian bric-a-brac, something crashing to the floor before finding the switch that would bring light into the darkness. With a stiff click of the switch, a lamp came on and two ghostly headless mannequins appeared as if by cruel magic. The gentleman sucked in his breath and clutched his heart before remembering these old artifacts were staples of a scene he knew well. One cheerful day, the curators thought it would be clever to place these mannequins, each wearing Victorian-era wedding gowns, on display as if they were characters in the colorful Vale Mansion saga. Of course, the curators would never come upon them in the dark. The gentleman moved quickly to the next lamp, when suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he perceived something impossible and horrible. The mannequin on the stairs had shifted its weight, ever so slightly, like one forced to stand for too long a time. He stopped breathing. His heart stopped beating. He slowly turned to stare down the ancient spirit. The mannequin was still as a statue. "Come on, old man," he said aloud to himself. "You've been up here 100 times. It didn't move. It didn't move." The second floor hallway, well lit, he quickly moved to the bedrooms. Turning on one lamp, click, then another. And he finally came to the place where Mrs. Vale died. In the uneven light from the hallway, long shadows distorted the landscape of the room. He was in the heart of the house now, the inner sanctum. If a ghost were to take up residence in the mansion, it would be in the bedroom where he now stood. He found the lamp switch and turned it. Click, light filled the room. He exhaled, closing his eyes. It's finished. He had scared himself to the point of madness, but now he could go back downstairs and await the dawn and caterers, and make fun of himself when the other volunteer tour guides arrived. His back was still to the door when he heard it. Click. Silence. Click. That sound. What was it? It was faint and far away. The gentleman strained to identify it. Click, click, click. It was louder now, coming nearer. He turned and looked out the bedroom door. With each successive click, he could see the light beyond getting dimmer. The lamps were being turned off. It had started down below, the parlor lights, the dining room, the kitchen. Then upstairs, the lamps clicking off one by one in their own accord. In the hallway with ghostly mannequins, in the creepy smoking room with the faces in the walls. In the guest bedrooms, those spaces were in total darkness now. Only the solitary lamp in Mrs. Vale's bedroom remained lit. He waited, paralyzed. Silence. There was a creak in the floorboard an instant before he heard it. Click.
Okay, everybody, now that I scared you a little bit, I'm gonna go ahead and finish my lashes and my mascara off camera, and then we'll come back and wrap this up. Okay, I'm back. I went ahead and did my lashes and mascara off of camera, and then I also went ahead and did my lip liner because it's just hard to obviously do lip liner and talk at the same time. So, but that was the Vale Mansion. I hope you guys all enjoyed the stories that I told about the mansion. It's a pretty interesting piece of history. And it said that the mansion was closed off for a long time for ghost tours due to the history of it. It opened back up in kind of like a package deal with 2 other places in Kansas City for like tours, but not like ghost tours, more for the architecture of the house and the history of it. And every winter they decorate it for Christmas, and they have Christmas parties and Christmas tours, and they decorate it for all the different holidays, and they have different tours for all the holidays. You can have parties there, and they decorate it up. You can have weddings there and all kinds of stuff. So it's more of like an event space, but they just recently opened it up to do ghost tours because of how interested people were in it and because of all the experience that the staff were having. So when they open back up again, being closed due to COVID, when they open back up again, there should be a pricing list up on the website, and I'll link that below as well. I believe that they have some events coming up in December for like ghost tours and stuff like that, but I'm not positive. Whatever I find, I'll link below. That way you guys have it when you are ready to go, if you are interested in touring. But that was the history of the house and some of the hauntings that occurred there. I hope you guys all enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!